Welcome back, everybody. As you can see here, we have a special guest with us today. This is my wife, Kim, and I'm excited because she has asked to join us for a new segment that we're going to be starting called Frugal Fridays. Super excited about this. We have some ideas on how we're going to do this, and we'll start explaining that here. But first of all, Kim's going to go ahead and give us a little introduction to our history in becoming frugal.
I like that you paired frugality and excitement because I don't think a lot of people put those two words together. So
That's true.
I think that's a fun take on what we're going to talk about. So frugality is a concept that seems synonymous to being cheap or thrifty. But I really like the word frugal, and mostly I like it because I stumbled upon a really cool book that we'll talk about in a minute that pairs frugality with the concept of intentionality and joy. I remember growing up, and you and I have similar histories, but I remember growing up in a pretty thrifty, frugal household. My mom clipped coupons. I learned very quick at the store how to tell which item was the cheapest based on the price per ounce or price per item at the bottom when comparing cans of soup and things like that. We didn't eat out very often, and when we did, it was a luxury to get to have a beverage with your meal. Usually we had a 2-for-1 coupon or something of that nature. So my parents, just like your parents, made really thrifty, frugal choices, but most of it was done out of necessity and not out of like an intentional choice. So, my parents were young, they had 3 kids. They came from backgrounds that weren't very affluent. They had bought their first home, and so they were putting most of their money towards that. So they really needed to keep costs low so that they could keep food on the table and keep us all clothed and into our various activities. So we lived pretty frugally growing up. Would you say that your background is similar?
I think growing up too, it's interesting because it was always an excitement to talk about how much you saved on an item. So rather than talking about how much the item cost, it was I saved this much, or I was able to get this for, instead of this price, I was able to get it down to this price, or I got this, found this deal over here that got us the savings. And so I remember when Kim and I started dating, I would get her a gift, and I would always tell her how much I saved when I got the gift, which now that I think back about it, that's kind of weird. But luckily, she came from a similar background, so I don't think she thought it was too weird.
I didn't. And it's funny because I still do that. Like if someone compliments me on something I'm wearing, I'll say, oh, I got it at a thrift store. It was only $8 or something, as if like somehow that adds to the value of the item,
Right, yeah.
Like this thing that you're admiring that I'm wearing, I got for very cheap, and so you should admire it even more.
And every time, if I tell my mom I'm looking to buy something, or if she tells me, hey, I found this over here, she always either will send me a coupon to go with it, or say, buy it here because it's on sale, or I found this thing on sale over here. And so it definitely is in my background too. So
yeah, I think Jesse's mom is the ultimate deal finder, and I really love that about her. So I think she's really good at finding the best deal or finding something on sale.
She had to pass a lot of that on to me as well.
Yeah. So there was a time when I had graduated from college and I became a registered nurse, and I was making a really decent income, and I felt like I deserved to not be frugal. And so I found that I was spending money, but I was spending money oftentimes for the sake of spending money. I wasn't intentionally buying things. I was just unintentionally consuming things. And I realized along the way, especially once Jesse and I took Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, and Jesse kind of stumbled upon the FIRE principle and got us started down that pathway, that I didn't really want to be an unintentional consumer. I didn't want to mindlessly engage with capitalism and consumerism. And so I started looking into different things, and couponing didn't quite feel right to me, or finding the best deal was something we already kind of did. But I just wanted more intentionality about what I was buying. And I actually stumbled across a really cool book It's called The Art of Frugal Hedonism, and it's a guide to spending less while enjoying everything more. And this is what the book looks like on the front. And I read this the first time maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and then I checked it out from the library, which in and of itself is a frugal act because I don't often buy books. I like to use them, use the local library that we have here. So I checked it out from the library and I read it and I loved it. And then I realized that it was something that I wanted to read over and over again. So about every 6 months, I would check it out from the library. I would read it and then I would return it and I would do that again. And so this past Christmas, Jesse actually bought this book for me for Christmas since it's something I read every 6 months. But
She put it on her Christmas list, and I said, "You've already read that book." And she says, "I know, but I like to read it every 6 months to remind myself of frugal acts that I want to do." So I thought, well, it's on her Christmas list. If that's what she wants, then I'll get her the book that she's already read.
I shared little pieces of this with Jesse, but I don't think he realized just how much of a true treat I think it is. So I am excited to have my own copy now so I can highlight different parts and underline stuff that I find pretty powerful. But we wanted during the Frugal Friday segments of Jesse's financial channel to kind of work our way through this book. So there are 51 different ideas that these two authors implement. The authors are Annie Razor Rowland and Adam Grubb. And they're also the authors of the Weed Forager's Handbook, which if you want to, that's one of the frugal principles in here. So if you want to get out in your backyard and forage for different weeds that you can use for teas and things, which I know is real kind of earthy and woo-woo, that's a nice book for that as well. I've read that once too. So
not that earthy and woo-woo is bad.
Right. So I just wanted to give you like a little bit of context about what you'll find here in the Art of Frugal Hedonism and kind of what you'll see on these Frugal Friday segments that we do here at the channel. I'll start out and just read you the first part of this about this book segment. Dear reader, we want you to have an excellent life, and we don't think you should have to spend much money to do it. This book is about how. That doesn't mean pages of advice on collecting discount coupons, squirreling away soap ends, and constructing careful budgeting strategies because, one, those things don't get to the heart of the relationship between how much you enjoy life and how you use money. And two, your authors find those things dull to think about for very long and certainly didn't want to spend 2 years writing a book about them. Instead, this book provides a selection of tips that dive right into the soft, gooey center of how we approach feeling good and how that affects our spending. It examines ways to overhaul some habits that you may have accidentally fallen into via living in a culture that encourages consumption at every turn. It looks at how changing those habits can generate a life that both makes more sense and indulges your senses. There are some practical bits and some sciencey bits. There are some recipes and some psychology. There are some serious bits and some really quite preposterous bits. So that kind of gives you a flavor for how they write. It's very engaging and comical, and they don't take themselves too seriously, which I really like. A little bit later, they talk about frugality and hedonism. So frugality is commonly seen as the domain of the hair shirt martyr, not to be entertained by any sane person who can afford all that nice stuff there is to buy. Your authors would like to demur. One of our biggest motivations for being frugal is hedonism. Hedonism is defined as the pursuit of or devotion to pleasure, especially to the pleasures of the senses. This devotion can come in many forms, however, and worshiping too fervently at the altar of consumer hedonism can really stuff you up for all the other kinds, which is where frugality comes in. The truly savvy hedonist avoids blunting her capacity for pleasure against a barrage of constant stimulation. He knows that the rewards of the journey frequently trump instant gratification. She shuns that level of convenience and indulgence that insidiously erodes her mental and physical vigor. Far from being acts of martyrdom, such frugality-compatible behaviors can in fact be your best ticket to enjoying everything more on both the deeply fulfilling and sensually satisfying levels. It takes some practice to become a frugal hedonist. If you're used to pressing a button that says cheese and having cheese come out, you might feel disgruntled about having to walk to the cheese mountain and exchange pleasantries with the cheese miners before you get your cheese. But imagine how much better that cheese will taste, not to mention other perks like your toned calves, the beautiful scenery on the way to the mountain, and your jovial friendship with a crew of talented cheese miners, which is what frugal hedonism is all about. perceiving a more multidimensional spectrum of pleasures and living accordingly. It talks a little bit about the authors. So they both, I think they're from Australia, so they're not here in the United States. So some of the things we talk about during this book won't necessarily apply. But they both grew up as vaguely middle-class kids in the 70s and 80s. More dirt, fewer screens, next to no takeaway meals, more walking to school, parents with bigger hair. So it sounds like they grew up in a time period that was very similar to when we grew up. And they basically decided that classic consumerism wasn't for them and they wanted something different. And so what they laid out was things that they were already implementing in their lives or that they saw in the lives of other people who were choosing a more intentionally frugal lifestyle. And they pair that with this mindfulness and hedonism, or the seeking of pleasure and joy in being frugal. So I think it's a really nice relationship between those two things that you don't often see or think about.
Well, this is definitely something I'm excited to get into, and it is, I mean, I haven't really talked about this much in the channel yet, but reading is not one of my forms of learning, and so where Kim is an avid reader, and so it's probably one of the reasons I haven't really dug into this book as much, even though it's been something that's been big for her, is that it's not how I learn. So I think that this is going to definitely get me the thoughts and ideas out of the book in a different form of learning, and I'm excited to see where we go with this. So I want to thank you for coming on the channel and for starting us on this new frugal path, or Frugal Friday path. So, and be able to share with the audience what frugalism is for us. Mm-hmm. So, if you enjoyed this, then please hit us with that like and subscribe to the channel for more Frugal Fridays. And if you enjoyed watching me and my wife, we do have another channel, and I will link that below. It's just under my name, Jesse Allen, but it's hard to find because there's lots of Jesse Allens out there. So I'll put the link in the comments below, and if you want to check out our hikes that we go on, they're just little day hikes, and you can explore Washington State with us. So thanks for coming.
Awesome. See you next week.
Bye.